It all happened when the city of New Orleans was recovering from the disaster and political fiasco that was Hurricane Katrina. I decided to leave my relatively stable job as a classroom teacher in order to start my own school from scratch. Now, most of my colleagues were super supportive. They called me brave and said how they wished that they'd had the courage to do something similar. And the rest of my colleagues, well, they just kind of smiled and waved goodbye and quietly questioned my sanity. Have you ever made a life-altering decision in the spirit of following your passion, and you forged ahead with all of the fire and fervor you could muster? I'm talking about knocking over toddlers and pushing past little old ladies and everybody else who dared stand in your way, only to look up and realize that you had just traded in one hamster wheel for a larger, shinier hamster wheel. Just in case you're not ready to be naked and unafraid in front of a room full of strangers, I'll be the first to admit, falling on the sword, and say that I, in 2011, used every dime of our savings to start our school, our business, our very own blinged out hamster wheel. It's actually still a little painful when I say that out loud. What is it about acknowledging the truth that on one hand, it has the power to destroy us and grind us into a fine, powdery substance, and then on the other hand, it has the power to transform us into the purest and humblest version of ourselves? Why is it so important to know when to change directions and what to take along with you when you do? Many of us are so busy believing our own hype and rehearsing erroneous, outdated narratives to the point that we ignore the obvious. Falling revenue, high turnover, just to name a few. And we ignore it to the point of no return, where the only option we have left is total abandonment of our ideas, of our passion, and eventually the businesses that we've sacrificed so much to build. Now, don't get me wrong. I know we will not get it right every single time, especially those of us who are pioneers in our fields and in our families. We haven't necessarily been gifted the blueprint for entrepreneurial success. So hear me clearly. You will miss the mark. You will make mistakes. You will fail. But that failure does not have to signal the end. Your business can survive if you are wise enough to shift when it's time and resourceful enough to leverage all of the lessons that you've learned along the way. See, I blame it on my mama. It was Doris Powell Craig and Flora G. Weber, my fourth grade teacher. Mama would shuffle the last 3 of her 8 kids, us girls, to the library, and we would check out books and write book reports to turn in to her. And Mrs. Weber, well, she made me feel special and seen from the moment I set foot in her classroom. So if not for those 2 dynamic women, then maybe I wouldn't have gotten so upset when my middle school principal called us into a department meeting and reprimanded us, reminding us, and I quote, that it was our job to get these failing middle schoolers out of her building and into high school so they could be somebody else's problem next year, end quote. I was so furious when I left that meeting that I immediately began making preparations for us to start our school. And that summer, we opened our doors and we were rocking and rolling. And for over a decade, we did amazing work. And for over a decade, we had major problems. First, the families we sought to serve could not afford us, so that caused issues with retention. And although we paid the team every single dime that we could afford to pay them, it wasn't quite a living wage, so that caused issues with quality control. And the kids, the students who needed the smaller, more intimate environment we provided, well, they could not wait to leave our imitation of an institution to go to a real school so they could play sports and march in the band. Did I mention the team that could barely afford to eat and live indoors on the salary we paid? Well, their paychecks were bigger than mine. It was exhausting. And it all came to a head Christmas 2022, when we were snowed in on the Fort Carson Army base with family. And as I sat there, kind of whining about our issues, my lieutenant colonel of a sister-in-law, yes, a real lieutenant colonel, turned to me and said, "Ari, if it's time to shut it down, shut it down." And so we decided that in order to save the business, we needed to close the school. I knew it was the right decision from the beginning. It was just the course correction we needed. What I had not anticipated, however, was that the decision would lead me into a 3-month depression. What are people gonna think? We were literally just featured on several news outlets. People are gonna think we failed. I struggled every single day to bury my ego and my expectations. It's imperative that every entrepreneur becomes skilled at harnessing the power and the pain of the shift. View it as an opportunity to birth something fresh, something relevant. While I was in that 3-month funk, a colleague reached out and challenged me to become a creator again. And with her encouragement and access to her network, we've begun the process of developing a financial literacy app for Black and brown youth. See, I've made more progress in the past 12 months in my business than I had in the past 12 years. Deeper connections, a broader range of resources, and what I can only describe as magical momentum. So I'll circle back to you, my newest and best friends. Is there anybody who is bold enough to admit that maybe, just maybe, you've been steering this entrepreneurship, see what I did, in the wrong direction? Whether you've been coasting and enjoying the slow and steady pace of your company cruise ship, or you've been blasting beyond the norms on your business rocket ship, none of that matters if your unique and divine destination is in the opposite direction. Thank you for your time. Let's talk soon.